Service of the Nigerian.
Welcome back to Good Morning Nigeria, and we're discussing Russia-Ukraine at war. At this time, it's 48 hours, and the federal government of Nigeria is making arrangement for special flight operations to evacuate our citizens from Ukraine. That's in view of the escalating tension between that country and Russia. Now, the Russians have started attacking military installations, that's what they say, in Ukraine amidst worries and accusations by the Western world of imminent invasion, which Vladimir Putin repeatedly denies.
Well, it's no longer a question of denial, Claire. As we know, the Russians have moved in, first recognizing the two breakaway republics. And the latest reports indicate that, of course, there have been attacks done around Kyiv. That's the capital of Ukraine. Two guests with us in the studios to discuss this issue. Let's welcome Ambassador Clement Onoja Aduku. He's a former envoy of Nigeria to the Russian Federation. He served there 2011 to 2015, and also a former head of mission in the Nigerian embassy in the Republic of Ukraine. Excellency Ambassador Aduku, pleasure to have you on the program this morning.
It's my pleasure being with you today.
We also would like to welcome Dr. Adoye Omale, a political scientist and international relations expert. Dr. Omale, welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning.
All right, Ambassador Aduku, we pressed for time, but let's try as much as possible to compress the relevant issues in this conflict into the remainder of the time we have for the program. Some would say that this is brothers at war, Ukraine and Russia. Was the war inevitable?
Thank you very much. It is, like you rightly observed, these are actually brothers at war. During my 4-year stay in Russia, I found that there's hardly any Russian you come across on the street who will not tell you that either his wife is from Ukraine, or his mother is from Ukraine, or he was born in Ukraine, or schooled in Ukraine, and the same thing from the other side. Hardly do you see any Ukrainian who will not establish a link which you can verify with the Russian Federation. Be that as it may, it is just that the ambition of the Russian Federation to dominate that area takes precedence over what the reality is on ground. I happen to have been able to speak with a lot of policemen in Russia that time, between 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, even before the invasion of Crimea. And I noticed that over 70% of the Russian policemen are from Ukraine. You can see the interlink between the two people. So what actually is happening is just two brothers at war, like you rightly said, and it is giving a lot of concern to the Russians themselves who live in Russia, and then the other Russians who live in Ukraine, because you can hardly separate a Russian and a Ukrainian. Up to recently, up to 2013, 2012, 2013, the official language in Ukraine had been Russian. But suddenly, when they started noticing that very cold relationship, they started to make their own local language the official language with effect from June 2013. If you go to Ukraine now, they no longer teach in their universities in the Russian language. They now teach in Ukrainian language. That tells you that it's just basically the same people. But then let us look at what actually generated this crisis. Since the demise of the Soviet Union in the summer of 2011, 1991, you find out that Russia has always not been at ease with Ukraine. Why? Because they lost already Hungary, Poland during the Solidarity uprising those days, and now they notice the move of Ukrainians to also drift to the West. They have not been comfortable with that. In 2012 to 2013, President Vladimirovich Putin, because those are his full names, introduced what is called a custom union, comprising, of course, Ukraine, Georgia, and some of these other countries that form what is now called the Commonwealth of Independent States, 15 of them with Russia at the head. So Ukraine was the very first country to opt out of that custom union. And then other countries followed, Georgia followed, and so on. So that was how that custom union never worked. That was his attempt in trying to recreate what the Soviet Union was in the past. He didn't stop there. On May 14, 2014, he invaded Crimea and annexed that place. And they all just made noise and they kept quiet. They took over that place. So when they didn't see any serious reprisals from the international community, they now summed up more courage to annex these two other regions. They call it oblasts in their language, which is something as regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. And they started backing up all those separatists. Of recent, they even gave out over 600,000 passports to those people just to give them that feeling that they are true Russians. And recently, they started evacuating those ones they have been able to co-opt into the Russian Federation in those two regions in the eastern part of Ukraine to Russia, so that in the case of an onslaught, they don't get involved in the, in the crisis.
So like Kingsley said earlier, was this war inevitable, ultimately? Could it have been avoided?
It couldn't have been avoided.
I mean, Putin was head-on.
It was head-on, was determined right from the time he annexed Crimea. He had made up his mind that he was not going to stop at that point. He was going to push further. And that's exactly what he had done, despite all the diplomatic negotiations and shuttles and all the discussions from virtually all members of the NATO countries, including the United States of America. They all fell on his deaf ears because he had made up his mind that he was going to annex Ukraine. That's exactly what he's doing.
Yes, listen, now that you've mentioned NATO, I want to bring in Dr. O'Malley, who is a political scientist and international relations expert. Do you see, what are the contending issues for Putin? Is it NATO threat of expansion? Is it his own imperialist, ambition of returning, Russia back to the Soviet Union era?
Well, I think it's a culmination of several factors. Fundamentally, Putin, right from the time his ally, President Yushchenko, lost election to Zelensky, Putin has never been comfortable. He felt that, just like Ambassador said, the ties between Ukraine and Russia has been very, very cordial. And having a Putin ally as president of Ukraine, he was very relaxed. But when Zelensky moved in with his pro-Western ideas, Putin definitely felt very, very uncomfortable. And with the declaration that, with the request by Zelensky for Ukraine to join NATO, Russia definitely knows that it was going to be against their own national interest to have a NATO-friendly country just by its border. So to me, Putin definitely is trying all he can do to scuttle Ukraine being part of NATO. And in international politics, attack is the best form of defense. So he has to move in. And it was inevitable because Putin knows the game of power and the game of international politics. He never wanted to negotiate from a position of weakness, even if they are going to the table ultimately. Don't forget that Macron has to do a quick diplomatic shuttle to meet with Putin, but that could still not deter him from.
So do you think it's justified because Boris, the UK Prime Minister is saying, look, this is unprovoked and unjustified.
There is no justification for intervening in the internal affairs of a sovereign.
But I mean, Russia is only protecting its own, like you said, territorial integrity.
No, in the UN statutes are very, very clear. There is this principle of non-intervention in a sovereign place, especially the use of force. You cannot move your military into another sovereign country.
Independent.
It's an independent and sovereign country. So the question of whether it is right or no is absolutely not acceptable. And I think there's a unanimity all across the world that the action is a violation of international law. My own worry is that there have not been commensurate response. I've been very, very angry since the day before yesterday because all this sanction thing, I think they are just treating the whole thing with kid gloves. I want a more purposeful response especially from NATO and the Western allies.
NATO has said it will not send, US has said it will not send troops you know, to Ukraine, but will to beef up NATO and all that. Kingsley,
No, I have a number of questions
yes,
to
please.
raise. Something that circulated on the excuse me, on a number of platforms yesterday. It was attributed to Henry Kissinger. I didn't hear Henry Kissinger speak that way or write that way, but assuming those were his words, they are relevant to this conversation, and I would like you to listen to parts of what was attributed to him or to whoever. Says, for the West, the demonization of Vladimir Putin is not a policy. It is an alibi for the absence of one. Putin is a serious strategist. Understanding U.S. values and psychology is not his strong suits, nor has understanding Russian history and psychology been a strong point of U.S. policymakers. So Putin is the leader of Russia, but we are assuming that he has taken a sole decision on this purpose. That's why I asked if these are brothers at war. Yes. That's Russian history. You listened to Putin earlier in the week, whether you agreed with his account of the historical links between Russia and Ukraine and otherwise, but he put it down to Russia's national interest. And he says that Russia will never allow Ukraine to be part of NATO. That they have made all concessions. They made East Germany possible, to let the Iron Curtain fall. Other former Warsaw Pact nations have been joining NATO, and here you are right at our doorsteps. In our own national interest, we will not allow that. Can you take example? Hang on a second, please. Hang on a second. Can you take example from what Israel itself does in the Middle East?
Even the United States.
That's right.
Okay.
It is
in 1983, the United States invaded Grenada.
Yes.
And killed Maurice Bishop, who was the leader of that country. So that's why I say brothers at war.
Yes.
Or powers at war.
It's a combination of factors, like Dr. Male said. You see, actually, you need to have a very clear picture of the mindset of the average Russian. I said from the beginning, I spoke with a good number of friends there who, of course, were afraid to speak out freely what they have in mind because you don't know who is listening to who. But what I gather from their mindset is that even if Russia has decided to annex that country to be part of the Russian Federation, it is not just going to come as a matter of fact. There will be a lot of things they have to consider. Because if today President Putin and his Kremlin associates decide to attack even these two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, the real indigenous Russians that will die, there will be more than you can estimate, because he had tried to move in some Russians, real native Russians, into those areas just to give semblance that that place originally belongs to Russia. So it's like you rightly observed, it's just purely like Israelis and Palestinians are said to be cousins. The war has been on. This war is not likely to end soon, because I don't see the end in sight until Russia gets what they consider their national security interests.
All right.
And they are not likely to get it because the NATO member countries led by the United States will not give him that concession.
You see, Dr. Mali, is Ukraine a sovereign entity with its own rights and constitution, able to determine whether or not to belong to any international instrument or not? And is Ukraine's membership of NATO determinant on what Russia says?
Well, you see, with the collapse of the USSR and the breaking away of the former Soviet republics, Ukraine assumed a status of a sovereign nation. Though Putin derogatorily referred to them as not a properly put together country or not a properly recognized nation. That's his own view. But Ukraine has been part of the international community, at least in the last few decades. They are recognized. They are a member of the United Nations. It's one of the countries, of one of the 193 or 94 countries of the United Nations.
The UN.
Yes, so the Putin cannot just refer to them as a no country. Now, having said that, we have to look at the historical antecedents of of Ukraine as an independent and sovereign nation of its own. Ukraine has held close to 4 elections. They are having democratically elected leadership since they gained independence. And I think they have a well-organized armed forces. One thing you should know is that Ukraine also have nuclear weapons. That is very instructive, and that is where my own fear is coming from, because they have a very potent nuclear weapon. Some of the facilities that they inherited from the defunct Soviet Union are still there. And they have an army of about 250,000. They have a good air force. They have an intercontinental ballistic missile program. So Ukraine is not just a pushover. They also have a their air defense system is being supported by the NATO and other Western allies. So Putin, I hope he's not biting more than he can chew. Because like Ambassador say, we are going to see a very long, prolonged war. I think what emboldened Putin is the lackluster response to his invasion of Crimea. And he's seeing it that, oh, he can do it this time around and go. But with the way the whole world, even yesterday, I think I read a statement from the Nigerian government, yes, condemning the act of Putin. So across the world, I don't think, up till now, I have not seen a country that has supported what Putin has done.
China has not come out to say openly,
yes,
yes, that, So
Yeah,
China
but
is,
we'll see what plays out at the United Nations Security Council. China and Russia are permanent members.
No, the problem with...
But let's take it this way. We're talking about a national interest. It doesn't justify aggression.
No.
It doesn't justify
It doesn't justify.
But the reality, the real politic of international relations is that powerful nations exert themselves. You're talking about what has happened. Iran is under a weight of Western sanctions led by the U.S. Because Iran is seeking to pursue a nuclear program, which Israel says is injurious to its national interest. All right? In 1981, Israeli planes flew to Iraq and bombed some facility where a nuclear weapon was said to have been in progress. That was a different country altogether. So if Israel could do it, the question would then arise, why not another? Ambassador, a little over 10 years ago, we also saw what happened. Is it that, as the Russians themselves have argued, that they have been irritated, they have been derided, they have been demonized because of the collapse of the USSR? The Republic of Georgia, if you recall, a little over 10 years ago, tried to irritate Russia. And you saw how Russia moved in there. And since then, have you heard any news from Georgia?
Exactly. This is exactly the same strategy that President Putin is adopting. Because if he could do that in Georgia, and even North Ossetia was used to be part of Georgia before, but now they are Russians. He quickly moved and gave all of them passports. I noticed that even the cash officer of our embassy in Russia happened to have been from North Ossetia. Larissa, and I asked her, she said, well, they just told them, gave them, and most of them come from all these relatively poorer countries, which constitute what they now call Commonwealth of Independent States. There are 15 of them, of course, led by Russia. So those of them who come from all these smaller republics that come to Russia to pack snow and do all these menial jobs and so on, feel very happy for them to even assume Russian nationality. So this is what has been going on. This thing did not start today. But then the bottom fact of this, of this issue is that Russia, in addition of trying to recreate what the Soviet Union used to be, which of course is getting difficult to do because even Azerbaijan, as one of these countries that wanted to be part of that is so-called custom union, have all pulled out. And they're all on edge now waiting to see what Russia will do next. Because if he succeeds in Ukraine, who knows? He may not go to Poland because Poland is already an integral member of the NATO. Yeah. But Ukraine is vulnerable because Ukraine is just seeking to be member. They are not yet member. You can imagine that Ukraine is already admitted into NATO. It would have been an all-scale war between him and NATO countries. So Ukraine is very, very vulnerable because just like Estonia, Lithuania, and Moldova and all those smaller places around, they are all very, very vulnerable because except Estonia and Lithuania, they are already part of the European Union, invariably part of NATO. But there are small other sports, there are 15 of them who are still vulnerable. When he finishes Ukraine, he might move to Moldova.
Ambassador, let's quickly, before we have just less than two minutes. Someone jokingly said yesterday that if former U.S. President Donald Trump was still in power, that Putin wouldn't have dared to do what he did.
Yes.
But because Joe Biden, it's not disposed to, go into war, and that's why we're seeing these, flush of sanctions. But how, what weight might these sanctions be? Do you think Putin will budge in the weight of the sanctions because it's coming from UK? So far as at this morning, we hear over 100, oligarchs have been sanctioned.
Well, you see, the problem with sanction is that it's a long-term measure. Sanction is to take time for you to begin to feel the weight of the sanction. So to me, what is required now is a swift and adequate response.
What does that mean?
Yes, it means that Ukraine has to be shielded. Ukraine has to be shielded, even if it means American forces moving in and giving the needed protection. Getting up to 100,000, 200,000 American forces to protect Ukraine will not be a bad idea, or the allied the forces to protect Ukraine will not be a bad idea. But I don't know if they will be willing. I don't know, because of the experiences they had in Afghanistan and the experiences they had in Vietnam and several other places. So they might not want to put their military at risk. But I know that the Americans have, and the allied, the NATO, have given commitment that they are going to share intelligence, they are going to support the Ukrainian military. How that support is going to translate to checkmating Putin is what I don't see.
I will keep saying Putin. I said it's Russia that is.
No. Why Putin is being isolated?
The Russian the Russian parliament is solidly behind him. Yes. But something that we're not going to have time to interrogate is NATO expansionism.
Yes.
Did NATO overreach itself? What else were you looking for to stabilize the global order? You see, China is a powerful economic nation and also a powerful military nation. What else were you seeking to achieve with all this push and push and push to annex, as it were, in terms of cooptation into NATO of the former Warsaw Pact countries? Did NATO overdo things in trying to win more members to itself? And in doing so, what was the end that it sought to achieve?
You can see that recently, every average Ukrainian you meet on the road will tell you he's pro-West. In 2017, recently, I was still there then, they waived visa entry requirements for Ukrainians to Germany, just Germany alone. And you see the euphoria, they were blowing horns in their stadium and they're jubilating everywhere. So to them, it was an achievement to inch closer to becoming either member of the NATO or member of the European Union first. And of course, invariably, the moment they are members of the EU, they are members of NATO by implication. But then, if you listen to the speech of President Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, during the Minsk Security Conference, he said that sanction does not serve his purpose now. He wants immediate action.
Could you just round off your thoughts?
Okay.
We have a minute.
So that any country that wants to support Ukraine should please come in full force, like he said. It's not just enough to say we're going to impose sanctions. How do you impose a sanction against Russia when Ukraine does no longer exist? Because it takes Russia just a week or less even to overrun that place. They say they're already in Kyiv. Lviv is just about 20 kilometers away from Kyiv, the capital. So they are almost there.
And the mayor of Kyiv, that's the former heavyweight boxing champion, Vitaly Klitschko, says that they will stand up to it. Maybe he's ready with his fists.
but just before we round off, in 30 seconds, how can do you think Nigerian students are safe in Ukraine?
Well, I think international law protects civilians, and I don't see if the Russians are wise, they should just target the military facilities and so on. I don't know. Yes, they are not safe because it's in a war situation. But I think that the Geneva Convention is clear on that. So I doubt if Putin knows the implication. If he doesn't handle the war very well, he might also end up in The Hague at the end of the whole war. So he knows the implication, and they might not target as much as possible civilian population.
All right, Dr.
Yeah,
Adoye.
but it's clear there's a humanitarian crisis that will be brewing right there.
Yeah,
humanitarian crisis.
Of Nigerian students, especially in
Yeah,
Ukraine, especially now.
15 seconds.
15 seconds, okay.
We are late, yes.
On the 24th of February, which is just yesterday, the embassy issued a statement with the title Travel Advisory to Nigerians living in Ukraine, excluding those who may have risked to live within the Russian-backed separatist regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. And the statement clearly tells Nigerians that the embassy is still functional and working, discharging its consular duties and responsibilities. But anybody who decides to find a safer place or a safer haven outside the Republic of Ukraine is very ready to do that. The statement did not categorically say that government...
Ambassador, I'm sorry, we have to go. Ambassador Clement Onoja Duku, retired former envoy of Nigeria to the Russian Federation between 2011 and 2015, and former head of mission in the Embassy of Nigeria in the Republic of Ukraine 2017 and 2018. He's currently the CEO DG Palmer's Academy and Continuing Education Research Center here in Abuja. We'd like to appreciate you. Dr. Adoye Matthew Omale, a political scientist and international relations expert, we also like to appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming. And that's Good Morning Nigeria for today, and of course the end for this week. We'd like to thank you and to say a big thank you to all our guests for today. I am Claire Delabo Abdul Razak. Always join us in the fight against rape and rapists. Bye-bye.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. Do have a lovely weekend and join us on Monday, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning.